So, back in February, when the world kind of looked like it would end up like it has, I actually did some bad things. I started panic buying, and not toilet paper, but rather bike parts. I have mentioned in a few previous videos and my test stream I did a week or so ago, 2 weeks, that the plan for my bike this year is to make it like the ultimate all-road bike that I can take on gravel and also do long all-day rides on pavement without feeling too slow. Now those all-day rides might be a bit postponed, but the plan for the bike is still the same. And at the end of the year I was gonna start swapping out some long-term wear parts like chain rings and cassettes, but this made me so nervous about how easy it would be to get anything, so I just started ordering stuff. And ironically enough, everything I ordered had pretty much showed up on time with no major delays. So what the hell, why wait? Let's start swapping out some parts. Normally I wouldn't do a dedicated video on like a chainring. I mean, how interesting could it be? But actually when I started to look around on what chainring I wanted, there were a few things that I had trouble finding information about, and that's usually what triggers my ideas for making new videos. So I had already decided to get the Garbaruk. As a Swede, I want to say Garbaruk. Anyway, so I had already decided I wanted to get the Garbaruk chainring because, as you can see, it looks a lot like the Cannondale Spider Ring that came with the SISL2 crankset, which I had on the bike a few bikes ago, but I love the look of that. So when I saw this last year, I was like, yes, I'm gonna get the chainring once it's time to swap. The information I couldn't find though was the offset on this particular ring. On the website though, it says this has a variable offset depending on what size of the ring, but it doesn't actually specify the actual offset. So I definitely want to compare this to my Eastern ring and see if there's any difference. Although it's not the main reason I got this, we need to check the weight. Garbaruk is a pretty well-known brand for very light cassettes, so it would be interesting to see. They don't specify the weight on the website. R2 Bike is the one I usually buy stuff from, and they specified this at, what was it, 92 grams or something? Might put the correct one here. If that's the case, this will actually be a few grams lighter than the Easter ring, but we'll have to see about that. The last thing I'm very curious about is the noise. One by narrow wide rings, in general, I have found they can be a bit noisy. I got the impression that my Eastern ring, the ones on there now, was a bit quieter than my old wolf tooth chainring that I had on the Shimano cranks. So I will be curious to test out if this one will be noisier than the Easton. So let's get into all this nerdy stuff. So before I take this crank off, I will just rig up the mic and audio recorder and do a quick spin to get some reference sound so I can compare the new chainring with the old Easton ring. Since the bike is rigged up on the trainer, I can easily remove the crank without moving the bike or mic. So the sound test before and after will be in the exact same position. I wouldn't call this a scientific test or anything like that, but hopefully it will help me determine if there's any major differences in noise. But I will get back to this test after we swap the rings. So getting the lock ring off the crank was a bit harder than expected. In the end, the way I did it was with an adjustable wrench and kinda using the crank arm as leverage and squeezing my hands together like you can see here. I hope that makes sense. Then some bad news. The weight. My Easter ring came in at 96.5 grams. The Garbaruk chainring though, 101.7 grams, which was rather disappointing, but I will have to live with that, I think. With the rings on the table, I can also see that the Garbaruk ring has a lot more offset than the Easton. According to my very amateur-esque measuring method, I got the difference to about 2.5 millimeters. In theory, it should make the chain line a little more closer to the middle of the cassette. The worry though is that the ring will be too close to the chainstay on a bike like the Open, where the chainstays are wider because of the increased tire clearance. Open specifies that 2 millimeters is required, so I was a bit worried about this when I got the ring. Luckily I ended up with 2.9 millimeter clearance, so I should be safe here. If we take a closer look at the Easton chainring, you can see that the teeth have like a hook-like bend to them, and this could be mistaken for wear, but it's actually made this way to improve chain retention, or so they claim. I haven't had any problems this far. Comparing the teeth to the Garbaruk chainring, you can see the difference, and the Garbaruk teeth are also a lot taller. The teeth length is why I was a bit worried that it might get a little noisier than the Easton ring, but we'll check that in a bit. The cinch system makes it very quick to put on a new ring. The problem is getting it off, like I showed you in the beginning. On with the new chainring on the crank, tighten it down to 40 Newton meters. And then the crank can go back on the bike. So the noise test, like I said, is not scientific in any way. There are loads of other variables that can play into the result, like how worn the Easton ring was, chain lube residue, out of the box new stuff. But at least it should show if there are any huge differences. So let's take a listen. Now, I will admit, during the recording of those clips, I didn't actually perceive this to be much noisier than the Easton ring. But going back and forth between those clips in the edit, you can see that there are a few decibels difference in favor of the Easton ring. Doing a few rides, a few bike washes, a couple of rounds of lube, it might improve things in the comparison, but since I actually didn't perceive any difference when riding, I will give this a pass. For reference, while the difference here wasn't really noticeable to me, going from a Shimano cassette to a SRAM cassette with a Shimano chain was a lot more noticeable to my ears, for whatever that is worth. So this will be my chainring solution from here on out. I should point out that this change will be an aesthetic change. I like the look of this. There were no real problems with the Easton ring. I could easily have gotten like at least two more chains through that ring before it actually needed to be changed because of wear. Usually I get about 4 to 5 chains before I think about that, but sometimes it's just fun to freshen things up a bit. Hopefully some people out there found this interesting. The next new thing that's going on this Open 2020 all-road project is definitely gonna be a bit more interesting, I think. So stay tuned for that. If you like this, ooh. There's some resonance going on here. If you found this interesting or something, feel free to leave a like. It's always appreciated. And subscribe for that next episode. And if you do, I will catch you in the next one. Peace!